Good morning. Hi. I was facing this way, now I get to see everybody. Of course, I'm a play therapist, so we have to say hi in different ways. Hello. Aw, you're shy. A little bit. You want to say hello? Okay, there we go. Yeah. This is great as a way to say hello to kids too. You can shake hands with your puppets. Okay. Well, I want to thank Monica and Jeff so much for inviting me to speak at this conference and for choosing this topic of touch. And it's not an easy topic, by the way. It's not an easy topic to get people to say, oh, come, let's talk about the issues of touch in therapy with children. It's like, oh, right, let's do that. So I appreciate so much that you have chosen this as a topic because it's important. It really is. I have some objectives for us today, and hopefully we'll get through. But I'm hoping that we can develop an awareness about ourselves regarding touch, and then also an awareness about a bodily sense of self related to others as well. And we're going to be looking at the mediating factors of touch that happen in practice with children, look at 5 working competencies, and look at some ethical and clinical guidelines, which you have, I think you also have that in your packets too, right? So hopefully we'll get through everything. This is just a little bit about me and some of my background and how I got to where I am today. But I kind of wanted to start by sharing a little bit of my journey. Like, well, how did I get in, how did, I get in touch with this word touch? Where did that start from? And basically, I'm going to just share that with you a little bit. But it does start going back to 1993 when I met one of my mentors, and her name was Viola Brody. But prior to that time, I was working in foster care and adoption. And in foster care and adoption, a lot of what we're learning about and trying to understand, at least back then, was a lot about attachment, right? And how do we help children attach, and what happens with disrupted attachment. And I was doing home studies and also working with the children in foster care and matching parents with children that were special needs children. And then I was also at that time, back in the 80s, interested in play therapy. I just heard that name, I heard the term play therapist, and somehow I just decided, I didn't really even know exactly what that meant back then, because back in the 80s, there wasn't a whole lot of training out there. I mean, now we have lots of training opportunities, right? But back in the 80s, we didn't really have a whole lot of that. And I was also working in an agency that to this day had one of the best playrooms, and whoever put that together really knew what they were doing. But it had, sand tray and all the little miniatures. I mean, this is the 80s. I mean, this is really well-stocked playroom. So I just, we didn't have supervisors back then in play therapy, so I kind of feel like in the beginning I was just trying to learn play therapy by what I call the seat of my pants. And then I started to attend some trainings on play therapy, and when I was learning about play therapy in the beginning, it was more about symbolic level of play, right? Metaphorical use, looking at the themes, and mostly we know of play therapy as children, maybe ages 3 and above. So back in 1993, when I attended a conference, there was a woman there, and her name was Viola Brody. And I had wanted to attend this conference because she was talking about attachment, and she was talking about, working with children to help heal through her approach called developmental play therapy. And at that time, she had written just a year earlier a book called The Dialogue of Touch. Now, when I attended this workshop, she was, talking to us about the importance of touch and how her approach in developmental play therapy, what she saw as one of the change agents, right? We're always thinking about what is the change agent for, working the relationship was one of them. But she was also talking about the importance of touch. And in her approach, she trained therapists how to work with children, and they actually did the intervention of working with the child through developmental games, but they were both mostly touch-based type of games. So as she's going on, I'm sitting up front, because at that time I didn't realize, I was in denial that I had some type of hearing loss, which now I wear correction for. So I would always sit up front in workshops. But so anyway, I sat up there and I started thinking about touch, and I'm thinking about therapists and touching children, and I would start going, Dr. Brody, and she looks at me and she goes, yes. And I said, well, what about the issues of therapists touching children? And so now to understand her answer, now when I met her, by the way, she was 85 years old, okay? So imagine that, she was 85 years old. Now you have to think, to understand her answer, you have to go back in time where she was practicing in the 50s, the 1950s, the 1960s, the 1970s. And the issues of touch back in those times wasn't so highlighted. It wasn't like, oh, you're touching the child. And I'm going to get into a little bit more where, things kind of started changing for us and that awareness in a few minutes. But anyway, her answer then, she was like, oh, well, I've never had a problem with it. So I thought, okay, well, she didn't have a problem with it. And so I was, kind of went on. And I was very curious, though, about this approach. So I started attending some of her workshops and 3-day workshops. And then I did an intensive 6-day workshop. And then, I started having her come to my area where she gave workshops. Now she's getting a little bit older. Then I went back for my doctorate in 97, and then I said, well, can you be on my dissertation committee? And so she was on my dissertation committee. All right, so you hear my journey a little bit. And then a few years before, I was able to finish my dissertation because I wanted to do it on developmental play therapy and looking at the issues of practitioners' experiences of touch. Based upon different exercises, experiential exercises that we use in training with developmental play. Well, she passed away. She died. Now, what was interesting for me is, I had this relationship with her, but there wasn't like anybody that we really knew of, the group of people who had trained with her, where she said, oh, if I pass away, by the way, you pick up the gauntlet and you start teaching about developmental play and you're my successor, right? Well, after she died, I started looking around and like, well, who's taking up her work? Who's starting to teach it? Well, I understood it. I really got it. And nobody was doing it. So I said, oh, well, I'll start teaching it. So I started teaching developmental play therapy, and you know what happened? Guess what? Dr. Courtney, and I'm like, yes. Well, what about the issues of therapists touching children? And I'm like, yes, okay. What about the issues of therapists touching children? Oh, this is an important question. So I started thinking about that a little bit, and I started thinking, okay, well, let's back up here. And, and I always do like I always have to do my backup dance, and I go, let me just back up here. Let me back up here. Let me think about this. Let me think. And then I started thinking, well, wait a second. This issue isn't just for developmental play therapy, right? This issue is really for all of us out there working with children. What about that issue of therapists touching children or children touching therapists? Okay? So I, started thinking about that, and then through my own process, I started saying, well, you know what? Maybe I can adapt the work of developmental play therapy, and instead of the therapist providing that intervention, that touch-based intervention, we can just modify it, and we can take it like a filial coaching type of position where we can support, monitor, supervise parents to provide that good, caring touch. And so that way it's like, okay, I'm not going to touch your child, but I can take the available caretakers to do it. And then I called that first play therapy, and I'm going to have a workshop in the afternoon about it. But I do it for 2 different developmental stages. One is for infants, and the other one is for a little bit older child, and where we deliver we guide parents how to provide that good touch or corrective experiences of touch through a story. So it's called First Play Therapy. Anyway, so that's how I stumbled across this topic. Now let's just think about it, and I'm just going to ask these questions, and some of these questions we're going to kind of look at through my talk today. So what are your personal beliefs about touch? So you can answer this in your own mind at this moment. Professionally, what kind of messages have you been given about touch? How do your experiences of touch guide your opinions and actions, your own personal experiences? And again, maybe we're referring to our countertransferences that emerge. What are your thoughts about touch with a child in play therapy? When did the word touch become a bad word, right? Does caring touch heal or make a difference? What are some of our cultural considerations about touch? What are your country's legal mandates and your professional ethics regarding touch? Well, I have dived a lot into this topic, and for my dissertation, what I looked at were the practitioners' experiences of touch, putting them through 6 different experiential exercises, some of them holding hands with each other, some of them where they're doing their self-massage, and after each one having them just journal their experiences of that. And what emerged and came out of that research was I wasn't prepared. I'm like, oh, you're just holding hands, and one's the giver, one's the receiver. But when I started looking at the journals, I had like 35 different participants in my research. I started going, whoa, wow, tremendous amount of countertransference, kind of qualitative sharing came out in those journals of holding hands and saying, Kali, that reminded me of, the time when my mother held my hand, or she passed away, or I've never, been touched in a caring way, or just, and then looking at that and realizing that even just short periods of holding hands with another person in a conscious way and being aware of it can bring up a tremendous amount of personal material that we don't even realize is there. Okay, so that led me just, looking at, I wrote a book called Touch in Child Counseling and Play Therapy, an Ethical and Clinical Guide. And in the last chapter of the book, you know how when you write a book, you know how when you write a book, well, it's an edited book. And so it's an edited book. And I wrote the beginning, the overview, and then different people wrote different chapters. Well, the last chapter, you're tired, when you're writing a book, and I'm thinking, oh, we have to write a last chapter because we have to kind of say, it's always like when you're when you're writing something or thinking about something, it's always this, so what? What does all this mean? How can we pull some of this together of what everybody has written about and maybe look at some core competencies in touch? To answer that question where I was raising my hand, what about the issues of therapists touching children, right? Or children touching therapists. So I came up with like 5 different core competencies, and so looking at the ethics of touch and our knowledge in touch, so that would be cultural and neurobiology, which we're going to learn a lot about in a little bit. How do we assess for touch experiences and practice? How do we intervene? And then our own self-awareness related to touch. That's really, really important. But the main thing is now, as we're learning more about the healing and connectivity power, the neuroscience that we're going to be learning about in a little bit, which I'm so excited, now that we know how important touch is and how we have to have those early touch experiences, it's now we say, okay, well, now we know that the healing part, but how do we implement that within sessions? I mean, who does the touching? Do you see what I mean? Like, I had to start thinking about that. Now that we understand it, where do we go from there as far as, okay, how do we translate that into therapeutic sessions with children, especially when there's concerns about surrounding liability and things like that. This is my son, by the way. This is my son, Austin, and this is my little grandbaby. She's 1 week old. Her name is Sophia. But what I loved about it is here, when he first got to meet her, what is he doing? He's taking his hands and he's kind of just making contact with her. He's just touching and he's looking at her. I have to say, my Sophia is 7 now, and she loves her Uncle Austin. I mean, she loves being around Austin. He's really, really good with her. So what I thought we could do, just for a moment, so we can get in touch with touch, is maybe if I'm going to invite you, if you'd be willing to just do a little experiential that I can guide you with. Maybe I'll ask you to maybe put some of your books down and you can get in a comfortable position. This won't take long. So we're going to do a little bit of saying hello to self, and I actually did research this, so I know all the qualitative experiences that could come out of it. But take your hands first and put them together, and just kind of do like a little warm up. Sometimes with children, we can do this. They have frustrations, and we can teach them a little. Breathe out. And then you can take your hands and then just put them a little bit, kind of distance from each other, and see if you can feel that energy, the pulse that's kind of happening. And take your hands again. Rub, 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 rub. My hands are a little chilly. And then kind of take them, and then just see if you can feel the energy in between, and maybe you can get them a little bit closer. And now, what I want you to do is just do a little pulsing with your hands, kind of cup them a little bit. Everybody can see me. Cup your hands, and then make a little ball. And in Reiki, we call this like an energy ball. Any Reiki practitioners in here? There we go, the energy ball. And if you do that, can you feel the energy? You can feel it between your hands, and then sometimes you can stretch it a little bit. Okay, so now what I want you to do is to take your dominant hand, and that's your right hand or your left hand, and put it on your shoulder. And then I want you to give yourself a little bit of a massage. For me, I can see I'm feeling very tight. It's being on the plane, sleeping in the middle of the night like cockeyed. And then take your hand and go down your arm. Give it a little squeeze. And then get to your hand. You can do your thumb. And your big girl, boy finger, and your ring finger. Giving it like a little, and maybe a little tug for each one. And we do with children, I did developmental play. We say, oh, you brought your hands with you today. Should we count those fingers and make sure they're all there? And then take your hand and go back up. And then kind of dig in there. When I get massages, I like when I do the deep massages. Okay, now what I want you to do is just take your hand and just set it down. And now take your awareness. Take your awareness, and I want you to see if you can just feel in and touch base with the part of your body that now has just had just a little bit of attention, and the part of your body that has not had any attention yet. See if you can get a sense for the difference between the two sides of your body. Now for me, what's happening is I feel a calling from the other side of my body. Am I getting some nods too? Like, it's like, what about me? So let's go ahead and do that. Yeah. Oh, okay. And this side's even tighter, by the way, than the other side. So just dig in there. And the thing is, when you give yourself a self-massage, you know you're the one doing the touch, so you know if it's too hard or too soft or too, you know what I mean? So, because sometimes if you're getting massage from somebody else, you're like, oh, they're not, it's too soft, it's not hard enough, or too deep. And then you can take your hand and go down your arm, and then massage this hand, and count those fingers. You want to make sure they're all there. And then with kids, we're trying to get them to have a sense of what we call a bodily self. So bodily self, a sense of bodily self, is tuning in and getting an awareness, like we just did, of that part of myself that I just gave a little attention to. And it doesn't take much, does it? And now if you want, you can do your back, your neck a little bit. Maybe you'll find some sore spots, just to kind of wake your body up. We've been traveling, right? I see someone stretching, so you can do a little stretch. So when we talk about touch, it's absolutely interrelated with our own body awareness. Do we have any dance therapists in here by any chance? So, to me, the dance therapists are so, I just really look to them to understand a lot about the body. And you really have to understand a lot, right, about the body awareness. Well, thank you for doing that with me. Well, move on a little bit more. So Viola Brody postulated that it is touch that ultimately produces a condition for a child to develop an inner self, a home inside, and is essential as a basic human need and growth. And I liked this quote by Renee Weber. I can see but not be seen, and hear without being heard, but I cannot touch without being touched. And of course, when we're talking about touch, we always go back to, we got a thumbs up on this one, Ashley Montagu, who a lot of people refer to as the father of modern touch inquiry. And he's one of those who's known to have written and inquire about the effects of touch. And so he said that the operative word of touch is feeling, feelings. Thus, touch was originally connected to emotion. So think of that we use the word touch in our daily language to denote a lot of emotional expression, right? So that was very touching. So that could represent, a heartfelt experience, or when you're emotionally moved by something. Let's keep in touch. I say that a lot. Let's keep in touch. She's very touchy about this issue. Can you think of anything else? Somebody said at one of the workshops, they said, she's a little touched in the head. I was like, oh, I didn't think of that one. So I think when I was writing the book, Touch in Child Counseling and Play Therapy, an Ethical and Clinical Guide, I had different authors writing different chapters, and a lot of people kept sending me emails and saying, Janet, I can't find a whole lot of literature out there regarding the issues of touch with children. And you know what they said? And then I already knew this because I was exploring the literature too. They said, but we find a lot about adults, the issues of touch with adults and the ethics and things like that. And I'm like, well, isn't that interesting? Why is it that there was more literature and research that had been out there regarding touch with adults, but not so much for children? And I'm talking about, the literature supporting the issues of touch, or not supporting, or addressing that. And then I started saying, well, it brings up a lot of anxiety for us to talk about touch, especially with children. And it's really like a taboo topic. It has been for a long time, and even over the centuries. So when did touch become a bad word? Really, when you think about it, when did touch become a bad word? So what I've discovered in my readings is that it skyrocketed during the 1980s due to several high-profile child sexual abuse cases that surfaced during that time. A good thing, right? I mean, as a society, and all across, our, professions, we just went, oh, what? We just were in denial about it. We didn't understand it, and then those cases came to the forefront. And then at that time, what happened, there was just like, okay, that's it. How are we going to stop this? And so what some of the answer to that was, we're going to institute no-touch rules, right, into our schools, daycares, agencies, and to specifically stop the sexual abuse of children. Plus, there were a lot more mandates like background checks and a lot of good things that came out of that as far as screening people who work with children. Of course, has that stopped the abuse of children? Was that the answer? But I liked this. Finally, there's been a lot of pushback to that, and this is the National Association for Education of Young Children. They came out with a kind of a white paper about it, and saying that programs should not institute no-touch policies to reduce the risk of abuse. No-touch policies are misguided efforts that fail to recognize the importance of touch to children's healthy development. Warm, responsive touches convey regard, and for children of any age. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with Joseph Chilton Pearce. He died a few years back, but he wrote that groundbreaking book, The Magical Child, back in I think the 70s or 80s. Anyway, he said, the untouched child is met with the command, don't touch, more than any other, and we adults are met with the same words regarding children. last year, well, actually in April of this year, I just had some research. I polled probably, I think we had almost 320 responses. But I was wanting to understand more about practitioners' experiences of touch in the playroom. And this was just published in, June? It was in April of this year, the results of that. And I was just trying to understand what's kind of happening within the playroom. What are the experiences of touch, children touching, therapists and therapists' attitudes, practitioners' attitudes regarding touch with children and adolescents. And basically what we're looking at here is that a lot of practitioners have a lot of concerns of liability that came out of that research. And basically, they're afraid that maybe the child would say that, a lot of people felt that maybe they touched them when they really didn't touch them. But it just kind of supported something that we already know that there's concerns about it, but then, until we get the research and now we say, oh, well, this is really true, and we're not just guessing at it. But we did realize that a lot of practitioners, what came out of it, I started realizing touch is really happening. Maybe we're not talking about it, but touch really is happening within sessions. And maybe we're not documenting that, and I'm not saying that you should document that unless there's some, really concerns that happen about it. But, and then that's a conversation to have. How do we document about issues of touch that arise? But anyway, I thought it was very profound that I realized, oh my goodness, we are touching children and children are touching practitioners, and here's the research to prove it. So I kind of thought about it a little bit more and said, well, even if some people say, oh, I don't touch children, I don't touch, but when you work with kids, it happens, right? And you can't say, because they'll come and tap on your shoulder, they'll step on your shoe, and it just, in the playroom, right? It's inevitable. It really is. It's really inevitable that touch will happen. So I had this thought that I wrote in my book, but I said, the question arises, how best can practitioners walk the tightrope between providing child clients with attuned, empathetic, and responsive touch, and at the same time protect ourselves from a professional liability standpoint, while also proficiently managing the myriad of instances when touch happens, right, including acts of physical aggression by the child, right? So this is kind of what I looked at, and thought a lot about this topic, by the way, over the years. And so it's like, well, how do we do that? Well, one of my teachers is Aristotle. He was a really amazing man. He really was. And then I saw in your one of your booklets, you had a quote by Aristotle, and I said, well, oh, isn't that cool? But he conceptualized, he talked a lot about ethics, about doing the right thing. Anytime you see something that says doing the right thing, that goes back to Aristotle. So Aristotle conceptualized that ethical virtue is about doing the right thing at the right time, toward the right person, with the right intention, and in the right manner. So then Aristotle answers, well, how do we know what the right thing is? How do we know what the right thing to do for a child with all these instances that we're going to look at in a few minutes that can happen within sessions? So he said, well, that often the right course of action depended upon the need to examine the particular details of each individual situation. And he called that practical wisdom. Isn't that cool? So taking that and then, applying it to touch. So the interactional, context of touch, that we always have to look at what is the context of the situation that's happening with that particular child's background, their presenting problem, their age, their developmental stage, their diagnosis, right? Their cultural and religious background, right? We have to kind of look. I mean, it's really a lot when you think about it. It's kind of like going like this a little bit. So we have to look at the mediating factors that impact, how we're going to approach how to intervene with a particular child regarding touch within sessions. So again, this is a little bit of summary about it, and the therapeutic modality that you're using as well. And then look at that, what impacts too, practitioner level in years of experience. Whether you're male or you're female, right? Or the child is male or female, right? That you're working with. All these come together and converge. And then our own countertransferences, my own personal history with touch. And the child's transferences towards the therapist. So you can see. So let's think about what are the mediating factors, and how how touch can emerge and happen within sessions. And I want you to think as we go through these for yourself, like have you greeted a child, a child may come to you. So I kind of break it down into two different ways. One is child-initiated touch, and the other one is therapist-initiated touch. So a child may greet you, right? They'll run up down the hall and give you a hug. And then there might be accidental touch that, a child brushes an arm against you as they pass in the playroom. I know I had a situation where the child had autism, and I, by accident, when I was passing them, our elbows kind of knocked each other in the room, because you know how that is in a playroom, right? But they go, "You hit me," and I'm like, "What?" And so it's like, well, wait a second here. Let's see what just happened. And I used it kind of as a teaching moment for them to understand, well, does this ever happen at school? Like if you're passing people in the hall, does this ever happen? So playful hand games of touch. Child shows you the patterned fun hand game. Have you ever do that? Have that happen with children? Okay. Aggressive touch by a child that they may hit, punch. Has anybody ever been hit? That comes out of the blue, doesn't it? I've had, unfortunately, I have had, situations where I've been slapped or punched, and I never saw that coming. But then what do you do when that happens, right? How do you handle that? And again, that goes back to the context. And I'm thinking of a case study right now where I had a little girl, and she had been terribly, terribly abused. She was living on the streets with her mother, and her mother used her to gain drugs. So she would use her child to sell for sex. And finally, the authorities found out and took the child, and she was in a home, and like a shelter. And then the shelter sought me out, and they brought her to my office. And so I started doing play therapy with her, and basically the way that she wanted to play is through role play. So she told me that I was going to be the child and she was going to be the mother. And I said, okay, well, how should this child be? What should I be like? How should I play? And so she directed me and told me. And so then I got down on the floor and I was playing like I was told. And then next thing I know, she comes over to me and she shakes me and she said, "You get up and you go in the corner." And so she picks me up and she walks me over to the corner in the room. And I was like, I don't know what I did wrong. I thought I did what, I was trying to empathize, like how, she might have felt. So finally, when she gets into the corner, when she puts me in the corner, next thing I know, she takes her hand and she slaps me across the face. So then what do you do? How would you handle a situation like that? So, and here's the thing, you have to think about the context. What is the context? Why of what she was doing? We were in a role play, right? It was a play. She was pretending to be the mother. So sometimes I do things right, or sometimes I feel like, and there's always different ways to skin a cat. But at that moment, I stepped out of role play, and I looked at her, and I said, "You are showing me what happened to you. You're showing me what happened to you." And I said, "I'm so sorry that you were hurt in that way." So I had to forget that I was like really hurting, and she was strong, and that was a hard sting across the face, But I had to be able to connect with her and understand the context of what was happening with her. So another situation, of course, then she totally just, kind of felt understood, and she started crying, and then she leaned in, and I was able to give her a little hug. But another situation where I was punched, this is another child that had no sense of himself. Well, she didn't either, but we were in a role play. But this little boy, he was maybe 10, and we were sitting on the floor and we were playing a game together. And then, thinking back, by the way, sometimes proximity, I should have been a little bit further away from him. He needed more space. But anyway, out of the blue, honestly, I didn't say or do anything, but I got punched in the face by him. But I had to understand, this is a kid that had no sense of himself at all. And so basically, at that situation, I just took his hand in mine, and I said, "This is not safe." I said, "Dallas, look, do you know that you have a hand? Look, do you even know that you have a hand?" And then he was looking at me, and then he kind of went, this. He had no sense of a bodily self. Do you know what I'm saying? So in that moment, it was almost like, I have a hand? He didn't even know he had a body. He was so out of it. So just bringing his attention back at that moment, letting him know that this is not safe. And then it's my job to keep you safe. And so then I had another child, and this is the last one I'll tell you, and it's like you're going to think, this poor lady's been beat up so much. But I was at a home visit, and so it was this young man. He had been abandoned by his father. There was a divorce, and so the father just totally left and was not part of the household, and he was missing his dad. Very, very, very angry. And so the mother was there, and you know how it is, a lot of parents, when you do parent therapy, they just want to complain about that, he's not doing this, and he's not doing that, and so then we always feel that pull, right, between play therapy and then family play therapy, and then addressing the needs of the parents, because sometimes it's valid. They're not listening to them, and they're just being disrespectful, and so anyway, I got punched in that one. But for this child, I really felt that, what I did with him, I said, I can't remember, I'll just make up names, but Johnny, I said, "Johnny, this is not safe, and it's my job to keep us safe. If you feel angry and you want to get some of those mad feelings out, come on over to the couch. And let me show you how you can get some of those mad feelings out in a safe way." And I had the mother come with me. And I said, Mom, here, watch me. And I hit the pillow, and really, and I'm mad too, so I'm just hitting it and giving it my all. I'm like, Mom, can you do this too? And then he's watching his mom, like, what? And so Mom's like, oh, okay, because, so, if I'm modeling and then the parent models a good, safe way to do it. Because he was like scared at that point, like, uh-oh, I'm gonna get, in big trouble, at this point. And then, so once I did it, the mother did it, then he was willing to do that. Do you understand what I mean by the context? That we have to approach things in our ways of intervening from different points based on all the particular details, the practical wisdom of helping. So we have, sometimes a child might show they have an injury, and then again, blocking, we might have to restrain a child, which is rare, but we do need to do that, and I believe in a nurturing type restraint. So here's a therapist-initiated touch, so maybe task-oriented, that hands might touch. When you give a child a toy or pass markers in the room, does anybody that happen for you? That's a common, probably, way that touch might happen. Assistance touch, child with disabilities may need steadying or help to get up. Attentional, a child is touched to show, get their attention about something. A buffered touch, again, so maybe through a puppet. They can count fingers, say hello. Measuring a child could be like an intentional touch. In my room, in my office, and I have a wall, and I have all these different little pencil marks going up for many, many different years of all the children that I've measured. So that's one thing I like to do when they come in and say, how tall are you? Come here, let's go to the wall and let's measure you. And so you're kind of making contact with them, but in a way that, we're just doing it through an activity. And then as they come in maybe over the months, they always say, oh, I want to see how tall I am now. And of course, they're stepping on their tippy toes to do that. Oh, you've really grown. Look how far you've come. The metaphor, right? The metaphor of saying. Okay, let's see. So what we're going to do now is talk about culture and our awareness of touch through culture. And sometimes when you look at the literature, they might talk about cultures through, they might say this is a high touch culture, a medium touch culture, or a low touch culture. And then, this is kind of summary of some of the literature. And then in the American culture in general, that's considered more of a low or medium type of touch. But that can change within regions, even in the United States. Because my family is from the South, they're from down in Alabama. So we do have an accent down there. But in the thing that we talk about in the South, in the States, I don't know if you know, but they talk about Southern hospitality. So, but some of the Southerners can be much more touchy, much more hugging when they greet, versus we might think sometimes more of our Northern Americans might be not as, they're not as open or to touch. And then out Midwest, there's more reserved with touch. And then, of course, in California, much more high touch there. And then we look at some of the Hispanic cultures. So we have some Spanish cultural backgrounds here. Would you say more high touch? Yeah, because I'm from South Florida, and near Miami, and we have a lot of South American. I have like a lot of therapist friends that are from South America, and I love being around them because they're always like giving me hugs and stuff like that, which I always enjoy. So what we're going to do is looking at kind of defining our personal space boundaries and our proximity comfort with touch. So I have an experiential that we are going to adapt, because obviously we're not going to take the time and get up and move around in the room, because then we wouldn't get through, the rest of what I'd like to share with you. But I'm sure maybe some of you might have done this in maybe some of the courses that you're in. It's kind of called a proximity experiential, where you pair up with a partner. Are some people familiar with this? Have you ever done this before? Some people. Well, you pair up with a partner, and one is the stander, and the other one stands at a distance. So and that person's called the walker. Okay. So what we do is you have the stander will invite the walker to start walking towards them. And once they get to kind of a distance that you kind of feel like, all right, this is my own personal space boundary and my own comfort level, then you kind of just put up your hand and you say, okay. And then you talk about that. And you talk about it from maybe your family, growing up with your family. You're looking at it from a cultural point of view. So what I thought we could do, and this is going to be in a little experiment, but I know we can pull this off, and I know that we can do it, because it's such a powerful way of getting a sense of your own sense of boundaries. Because when we talk about touch, right, and we talk about getting in touch with our own sense of personal boundaries of touch, to me, this is like the touch boundary experiential 101, right? Okay, that if we're going to understand it for ourselves, this is kind of like a beginning way of looking at that. And I thought it would be good if we could have a little experiential with each other. However, we're going to stay in our seats, and I'm going to ask it, so we're going to adapt it, and we're going to try to adapt it by using a hand experiential. You think we can pull this off? Do you think we can do this? So I know that you are sitting near people, and I'm wondering if, I know we like to probably sit with our friends and things like that, but I'm wondering if you could find, and don't do it just yet, because we want to make sure we can make this work. I wonder if your little area or near you, a circle of friends, if you could find somebody that you don't know, where you don't have to get up and move out of your seat. Maybe there's somebody behind you, or maybe you're sitting next to you, but somebody that you really don't know, because it does work better with someone that you don't know. And in this, as we adapt this, I'm going to ask one person. You can use a hand, whichever hand. You're going to be the stander hand, okay? See how we're adapting this? We can play, right? We're all play therapists. And the other person can then be the walker hand. See, I think we can pull this off, right? And I'm going to relate this, how we can do this with children, by the way. So I always try to do what we're doing as relatable back to our work. So then I'm going to ask the other one, who's the walker hand, to then come, close to a distance. And when the person sets the stander hand, that person gets to a point where you feel it's close enough, then say, okay, stop. And then just see, we're using the metaphor, right? Can we adapt this? Do you think this will work? And then basically talk about it. And you can just pretend maybe you are walking and you're doing a distance with each other. And then just stop and then just talk about that for a minute. And then I want you to switch turns with each other. And I'm not going to say, okay, switch, because I think it's going to just be too much happening. So I think we can at least try it with one group with each other. So can we do it? Would you be ready? Okay, so find somebody that you don't know. Okay. Wow. I was watching out here. And normally we would switch with different people, but again, if we had more time, we would try to get experience of what that's like to, practice with different people and how maybe the boundaries are, especially if there's people that right? Then the boundaries might be like that. So yeah, what did you notice about your personal space comfort in general? And again, we didn't do different people, but if you do, you can think, how does that change? But just for yourself, between the different people, especially family members too, and what made the difference in the types of personal comfort, discomfort. I wish we had a lot of time to really process this, because I'm getting nervous because we only have maybe a little less than 25 minutes left, and I would kind of like to share a little bit more with you. But at least you had an opportunity to share with your partner, right? So just show of hands. Did you find somebody that you didn't know and you did the exercise with? And did you feel like you got something out of that? And you can see how this can be adapted with different, populations. But basically, De Laurier's was a early mentor of Viola Brody, and he maintained that the development of the self began with the appreciation of the body, and he called this early consciousness of body the bodily self. So this is where, when I in the literature found this this term to be found, the bodily self had to emerge before there could be further development of the self. So how do we can translate this to children? And you can use this in schools, boundaries with schools. With children, if you're teaching about personal space boundaries, you can actually do that exercise depending on the age of the child, where they can get a personal distance and understand about their personal space boundaries. But I think with issues with touch, we do need to teach children about it as well, right? So sometimes we use the hula hoop. Do some of you use that kind of analogy with children, that because the hula hoop space around them? Here's different ways that you might adapt this exercise in sessions with kids. But with I have puppets, and you can do puppet proximity space boundaries. And I'll give you a little case example. I had a 4-year-old little girl, and she was referred to me by the school because she kept pushing children. She was pushing them. Of course, she wasn't using her words, but she couldn't even get in touch with what it was that was bothering her and why she needed to push people away. But I gave her a piece of string, and I talked to her about, our personal hula hoop, and I said, if you were going to put, a string around you for your personal space hula hoop, what would that look like for you? And she put the string down, and we put like a little puppet in the middle that represented her, and she put the string down, and guess what? Her personal space boundary was huge. It was very, very, very large. So what I did with her is we practiced a little bit, her setting safe boundaries and letting people know that she, that they were getting too close to her. And in my office, I'm a real puppet fiend. I just love puppets. And every workshop I would go to, I'd always reward myself by buying one puppet. I have 50 puppets. Well, anyway, in my office, she wanted to do this personal space boundary exercise with all 50 puppets. She was a hard worker. She really was. And so what I did is I had her pick a puppet that was her, but she stood with the puppet, and then I went to, as far away from her in my office as I could, and I would have her pick a puppet that she wanted me to start coming close to her. So she was here, and then I would be back here, and then I would tell her, let me know with what's this puppet, and maybe puppet has a name, and all, is a boy or a girl, and so she got to say. So I would take my puppet, and I would start coming close. Okay, let me know. And then she put up her hand, and she said, okay, all right. And then she'd say, okay, now get another puppet. I did this I'm on my knees, by the way. Imagine that. I'm on my knees in my office, coming closer. But again, I really felt that that was helpful to her, that she needed to be able to practice. And sometimes we do that, right? You know, with our work, and we do different ways of working with children. Then sand trace circles. Maybe with a little bit older child, that they can, you know, have a figure that kind of could represent themselves if they want. And then they could just draw the sand, their circle around themselves. And then they can pick different figurines that could represent different people in their life. Some could be inside the circle, some can be outside the circle. So just showing you, that's really good with teenagers, by the way, too, to do it that way in the sand. It's a little bit more cool. Clay, you can actually get some clay. They can make it around them. And think of in groups. Do you remember this Mother May I? Do you all play that over here? So that could be another way if you have groups of children, for them to get a sense of understanding of their own sense of boundaries through Mother May I take 3 steps forward, right? No, you may not. You can take 2 steps forward, and just learning that empowerment of I can set boundaries with people regarding how much space they can come near. And then, did you ever play red light, green light as well? That's another boundary type of example. And then, boundary chant with hand movements. I had to add that one. I had a little girl that I worked with. She was when I first saw her, maybe, 5 years old, maybe 6. And she had a situation where another little peer had touched her inappropriately, and so, then she told her mother, and then the parents had to get together and talk, but then they had to come to the therapist, and so we were talking about boundaries and setting boundaries then, but then I didn't see her for a while, and then she was 14, the next time I saw her, she came to the office for a different problem, different issue, something that was happening at school, but she's, at the end of the session, before she's leaving, she said, "Oh, I have to show you something." And I said, "Really?" She goes, "Yeah, I have to show this to you." And I'm like, "Oh, okay." And I had no idea. I didn't even know what she was going to do. The topic of, even what happened to her when she was younger didn't come up in that session. But she stands up and she goes like this. She goes, no, I have to think if I remember it right. She goes, "Stop. Don't touch me there. This is my no-touch square." And I looked at her and I'm like, "That is so cool. Where did you learn that from?" She goes, "Oh, a friend taught me." And I said, "Well, I give workshops and things. Is it possible? Can I share this with her?" She goes, "Oh, yes. I want you to." She even let me videotape her, but I don't show that. But anyway, isn't that pretty powerful? So, that's something that you can do. So we could do that together. You could just like this. You go, "Stop. Don't touch me there. This is my no-touch square." Okay, Francis, I didn't see you doing that. He's like shaking his head. No. Okay. And then you can have, my safe space, boundaries and circles, and, who they can allow close to them. And you get the gist of what you can do with that, right? But teaching space boundaries, again, it starts with our body awareness, and that, your body stance and movement tells your story. So again, it's the body and our sense of a bodily awareness absolutely has something, is connected to touch. Body and touch, go hand in hand. So we have to understand, so we can let kids know, we can teach them about their own body stance. So this is a dance therapist. You're shaking your head, our dance therapist in here, Mary Starks Whitehouse. Yes? No? Okay. Gradually, she's a pioneer. Gradually, I came to see that movement is the primary medium of our aliveness. Our movement is our behavior. There's a direct connection between what we are like and how we move. So here we have the peanuts. This is my depressed stance. When you're depressed, it makes a lot of difference how you stand. The worst thing you can do is straighten up and hold your head high, because then you'll start to feel better. If you're going to get any joy out of being depressed, you gotta stand like this. But it's really, really true. And so again, how do we translate what we're talking about back to our practice, right? To children, again, a sense, having them get a sense of their body, their bodily self. And so I don't know if you're familiar, but did anybody see there's a TED Talk by the Harvard professor? Her name is Amy Cuddy. I'm gonna give you some homework, okay? Your homework is you're gonna have to find that talk. It's had like 10 million views or something like that. But in there, she was talking about some research that she did, because she was trying to understand. She noticed that some of the students that she had in her class, they either did well in the class or they did more poorly, and she correlated that on how she was observing them to sit during the classroom, with the ones that sat up a little bit more and held their heads up and asked more questions, they did seem to do better in class. But anyway, so then she did some research about the Wonder Woman stance. So that actually can reduce the hormone cortisol, increasing assertiveness, hormone testosterone. So I'm going to have everybody stand up. We're going to do the Wonder Woman. Okay? So you stand up. And you're supposed to hold the pose like 3 minutes, but I don't know if we'll make you do that. Okay, so you have to stand tall with your hands on your hips and your feet apart, shoulders back, chin up, open up your torso, and emit confidence. Yeah, okay. All right. I love all these confident. Oh, Jeff, I love that. This is great. Okay. The Wonder Woman. Okay, Superman. All right. We can let you do Superman. If you don't want to be Wonder Woman, it's all right. Okay. Well, think about that. We can recognize, the bodies. How does that child sit? And can we invite them to, just try to adjust that posture a little bit in the office with you? Have them, just say, let's just walk. I noticed your shoulders. Let's just try this with me. And let's walk together. You don't have to walk now, but, you can just do that and say, tell them about the Wonder Woman, or if it's a Wonder Boy, or, if it's a boy and doesn't want to be Wonder Woman. And then just kind of walk in the office. And then invite them as a homework to 10 more minutes then, okay. To kind of walk around and then to try it at home. Try it walking down the school hallway. If they don't feel like they have any friends, say, I want you to try something new. Well, if you're walking down that hallway, just try to, kind of stand up like we're practicing in here, put your chin up, and when someone passes you, say hello to them and smile. And see what happens if they don't think they have friends. It's like, I've done that, and I've come back and said, wow, I can't believe how many people smiled and said hello back to me. Like, oh, well, thank you for doing that. You can sit back down. You all are very polite. So now, don't you feel like the testosterone has kind of been released, and don't you feel more confident? So, okay. I love that. But children that have received warm, caring, healthy touch experiences are comfortable within their own bodies. That you can just feel it, right? And of course, this is my Sophia here. Now, remember you saw her? She's a tiny little baby. Well, I have to talk about, don't get me started with my grandchildren. But she's 7 now. I think she was like 4 or 5 here. But I just love that. And then you can get a sense with children, right? The children that feel comfortable and confident. Remember having that sense of an I that Viola Brody was talking about, that sense of a home within. And what she means by that is just that sense of an inner directedness and understanding. Well, that comes from a sense of a bodily self, right? Like an internal sense of an I. And of course, I love that when I saw that picture of my Sophia. Of course, I had to throw this in there by Charles Darwin, touches the means by which the mother expresses her love to the infant. And so again, now what does this come back to for us? Is that if we're going to be looking at the issues of touch, the concerns of liability, that what do we go back to? We go back to ethics. And what is really, really cool that I really loved is, I didn't realize this, but later I realized that the only article that my father ever wrote was about ethics, the business decision-making and ethical synthesis, and this was in the Council on Business Ethics. And this is, I don't know if you recognize that man, that's with him with Vincent Price. Everybody familiar with him? But I'll have to find me later and I'll tell you the story about it, but it's an interesting story. Okay, so then working touch guidelines. Basically what I want to do is just refer you to it. We're not going to go through all the boring step-by-step reading it to you, but I wanted you to have it. It's in your packets. And you can look. Recommendations. So recommendations supporting the ethics of touch in child counseling and play therapy, a beginning foundation. Now, what this means is that over the years, since I've been teaching this topic, I've tried to come up with a list of what does that mean to have ethical considerations, ethical guidelines, and what I want to let you know is that this is a working document, and what you have here is in the last chapter of my book, so I'm giving that to you. But I'm letting you know it's a working document because this is just part of my brainstorming, and this can evolve, it can change, it could be added to, it could be deleted. So just, if you read something or if you have something in your mind that you say, you know what, you should add this to the list. But basically we start out with the ethical considerations, self-awareness, special considerations in counseling relationships. So I've kind of tried to break it down into different categories. And you can read that later. I think I'm going to be, like Monica was saying, I think I'm going to be on time a little bit. But we always need to think about, what is the treatment goal for the child, right? What is the, touch should always be considered if it meets the goals. And you can go through this. This is all in your packets. And then we can have a kid's coupon, good for as many hugs as you need. And this is my son, Jesse. Of course, I got to go back to the grandkids now. And they love their daddy, they really do. And so that's my Sophia with my Abigail. Of course, we have another one now, and then we got another one in the oven. And I just love being a grandma. It's like, bring it on, You'll go, we're having another baby. I'm like, oh, this is great. and the kids love coming to my house because they have like a little playroom at the house. A little dollhouse and little toys and little tables for them. And again, this is the therapy adapting that. I'm going to be talking about the first play kinesthetic storytelling for the older children, or what we call backstories for kids, telling, kids know them as backstories or maybe hand stories. And then I have a first play infant story massage, which is a 5-day training, and it's a certification as well. But that's where we teach parents how to provide good caring touch to their babies. And this is my daughter-in-law over here. Her name is Stephanie, and that's my Jacob down on the, I guess you can't see him, but that's my latest grandbaby. Of course, I have to use them for my training models. And this is one of my practitioners who is doing some research on first play now at Florida Atlantic University, and I'm so thrilled about it. It's a pilot study. So that's that, and developed from developmental play, and then the first play for the older children, and we're going to talk about the magic rainbow hug this afternoon, and live your passion. As you can see, I'm passionate about this topic, and you all have been absolutely wonderful, and a great audience, and I think I'm about at the, and oh, I'm getting the thumbs up. Thank you so much for your attention. I really appreciate it.